After that, the boss realized that Pastry had used the fallen sword to break free and defeat his underling. Suddenly, we hear some voices outside, and Cass arrives with backup. The boss realizes that he's done for, so he decides to retreat, but Pastry doesn't plan to let him go. Just then, Cass and Glakeage arrive. Pastry asks Glakeage to look after Licorice, and he corners the boss with his dad. However, the boss uses his magic to create a hole and escapes. Pastry tries to go after him, but he is stopped by Cass, who tells him not to chase blindly. Cass is glad that both his son and Licorice are fine. Fuel arrives with the knights from Cattlesec and Huberek House, and they take Licorice back home. As the captured mercenaries are taken away, Pastry asks Cass about the mastermind. Cass tells him they have captured a man who tried to escape from the back door. He calls himself Duke Lehengo Armire. Their nobility status was stripped in the war 20 years ago because they leaked information to the enemy, and Cass tells Pastry that one move by the leader can change the fate of an entire family. Just then, the knights arrive and tell them that they need to brief the incident to Margrave, who is waiting for them in his estate. Cass suddenly makes up an excuse to go after the boss with Pastry and asks Fuel to handle the report. Following this, Cass wonders where the boss might have gone, and Pastry believes that he couldn't have escaped since he had little magic left. Also, the place is surrounded by their forces, so he should have been caught. Suddenly, it hits them, and they immediately go back to the room where Pastry was captured. They find the boss hiding in the hole, and the boss threatens to kill them. Cass tries to make a move, but Pastry wants to fight the boss solo to build up more suspense for the viewers. The boss reveals his name as Strudel and plans to take Pastry as a hostage for his escape. The boss swings his sword with all his might, but Pastry blocks his attack, which also breaks Strudel's sword. Strudel is surprised, and Pastry knocks him out. Cass learns that Pastry used his magic to sabotage the sword, and realizes that's why he was being so cocky about the fight. Pastry is then worried because of this incident as it will delay his dream of building the land of sweets. A month later, we see the official engagement party of Petra and Squale. Pastry is delighted to see Petra looking happy. Duke makes an appearance and expresses his gratitude to Cass and Pastry for protecting his granddaughter-in-law. At this point, Pastry brings up some suspicions he has about the kidnapping incident. He points out that it was very odd of the mercenaries kidnapping the wrong target despite their well-calculated plan. Pastry suspects a third party's involvement, someone who holds a grudge against the Armire house and aims to prevent them from ever rising again. Duke is taken aback by these suspicions and asks if Pastry believes it's him, but Pastry dismisses the idea, suggesting it's just a child's imagination. Later on, Pastry asks Duke for financial assistance to cultivate crops in his territory, playfully hinting that his mouth may slip if he's denied. Duke realizes that he's outdone by Pastry, and agrees to help him. Thereafter, Cattlesec admits that he was the mastermind behind the incident. He clarifies that he released false information that led to the kidnapping but had no intention of endangering the two girls, and mentions he needed to reflect on his mistake. Huberek appears and expresses his gratitude to Pastry for saving his daughter. He inquires about Pastry's plan for settling down, to which Pastry responds that he's still young and hasn't found anyone yet. Cass becomes aware of Huberek's plan, but before he can intervene, Huberek asks Pastry what he thinks of his daughter Licorice. Pastry responds that he's too young, and can't even wield his Excalibur yet. Huberek doesn't give up, and asks if it's because he doesn't like his daughter, and Duke smirks realizing Pastry is trapped. Cass realizes that they've been tricked into accepting the marriage proposal. Duke enjoys the opportunity to tease Pastry, and announces the engagement to all the guests. Afterward, Licorice arrives, thanking Pastry for saving her life, and Pastry thinks she looks beautiful. Following this, Huberek toasts to marrying off both his daughters, while Duke raises a toast to Pastry becoming a part of their family as an in-law. Squale and Petra are also pleased about Pastry becoming their in-law and ask him to call them Big Bro and Big Sis. However, Pastry feels that it's a bit sudden. Later that evening, Licorice appears and asks if he doesn't like her. Pastry replies that he's happy to be engaged to her, and she shares her homemade cookies with him. He tells her that they are delicious, making her happy. He resolves to protect her smile and build a country of sweets with her. Afterward, Cass tells his wife that he has something important to share. Seeing him tense, she wonders if he blew off some money for purchase and assures him it's fine. However, he informs her that they have a new daughter in their family. Agnes is shocked and immediately thinks he's having an affair. He tells her that he couldn't help it, and she asks if the girl is pretty. He explains that she's very pretty and comes from a high noble family, and she also has a twin. Agnes finally loses it, thinking Cass is building a harem. He apologizes for not consulting her before accepting the girl into their family and mentions that Pastry agreed to it as well, believing she would make a good match for their son. Agnes then realizes Cass was talking about Pastry and walks away. Just then, Pastry arrives to inquire about the situation, and Cass tells him that it will take her at least a month to get over this, but Agnes on the other hand is happy about it and can't wait to have a new daughter. We then see Retesh receiving the news about the engagement of House Morteln with the Huberek family. She's shocked that the poor village received a proposal from a high noble house and spills her coffee in surprise. The servant suggests that this might be temporary due to the kidnapping incident, and they may cancel the engagement in 2 or 3 years. However, Retesh thinks differently. She points out that when Cass came 20 years ago, it took several years for their first harvest, and yet they stopped their wheat production to plant beans for 3 years. This resulted in beans fertilizing the land and increasing wheat production. She believes that Pastry is behind it and sees his great potential. After all, he was the one who negotiated with her for the bandit reward. She thinks that Lord Huberek has also recognized Pastry's potential and believes she's beaten. Back in Morteln village, we see Pastry setting down some boxes, and his friends are curious about what he ordered. He mentions that it's something he obtained from Duke and his grandson after they promised to support him in developing his land during the engagement party. The boxes contain small plants known as pseudo-acacia, and Lumi wonders if he plans to make a pie with them. He explains that they can't eat or make anything from these plants, but they would grow even on barren land and produce nectar. Pastry explains that this nectar will be similar to honey, and he could use it to make many sweets. They wonder how they will grow the plants since they need water and soil, which their territory lacks, and it will cause the plants to dry out. But Pastry has a plan. He intends to build a large reservoir that will hold a huge amount of water, and he has chosen this unused part of the land for it. After that, we see Fuel giving a budget recap for the past year, and it's the first time they've received profits. Cass is glad that his hard work is finally paying off and believes that his son is a blessing from the goddess. Fuel then mentions that he has both good and bad news. The good news is that they have over 40 people willing to move to the new village, Lolate, and most of them are refugees who have been victims of bandit attacks. Additionally, 5 people have joined them as retainers based on the news about the kidnapping incident, and Glakage is currently training them. Cass is glad to hear this news and believes it will help their territory flourish. The bad news is that he heard that Pastry is up to something with his friends. We then see Pastry and his friend standing in front of a huge rock. Pastry then uses the magic he copied from Strudel to put a hole on the rock. He believes that his magic will work and begins to dance around. He then continues to use his punching magic to clear away the boulders. Lumi and Mark are amazed that he was able to do this on his own. Additionally, the bottom and walls are hardened for the reservoir. Pastry plans to plant the seedlings around the reservoir since it will rain soon, and the collected water will also be used, which will double the effect of the plant's growth. If all goes well, he can soon start building his dreamland of sweets. Lost in his sweet dream, Mark and Lumi ask him to snap out of it, and he's shocked to see his father, Cass. Cass initially thought that Pastry was demolishing the mountain, but thinks this is on another level. He becomes furious and punishes the 3 kids for their actions. Later, we see Ritesh still thinking about the engagement of the Morteln family and mentions that she would have done the same as Huberek if she had a daughter. She's upset about how Huberek and Duke aligned with the Morteln family without involving her. Her servant jokes and suggests that maybe she should marry him herself. She mentions it would have been possible if she were 10 years younger, but then thinks of an idea and plans to use it. A month later, we see villagers praising Pastry for creating 3 water reservoirs within a month when it usually takes months to build just one. Pastry then arrives with his friends and is glad that they've completed planting the seeds. He hopes they can make honey, and his friends can't wait to taste his sweets. Just then, Josie approaches him with a letter and wonders if it's a love letter from Licorice. Pastry learns that it's from Ritesh inviting him to a tea tasting party, and she wants him to experience her extravagant taste, while Pastry wonders what kind of plot development she is planning. After that, we see the new recruit Nicolo, who is overwhelmed with the paperwork. Fuel tells him that they're busy because of the little devil, referring to Pastry. Just then, Pastry arrives, having overheard his comment, and reminds Fuel that the land belongs to his father, so the responsibility falls on him. Fuel retorts that it was Pastry who started putting holes in the ground, increasing their workload, and suggests Nicolo take his complaint to him. Following this, Pastry inquires about the whereabouts of his dad because he received an invitation from Ritesh. Suddenly, his dad appears from behind and informs Pastry that he has already heard the news. He tells Pastry that they will discuss it later, as they have an important guest, and that's when Licorice shows up. Pastry is happy to see her, and Fuel teases him. He learns that she will be staying there for a while, and Pastry is nervous about the plot development. After that, we see Lumi rushing to Mark to inform him about Pastry's fiancé, but Mark is already aware of it. She tells him that she heard rumors that Licorice is a sexy older woman who has Pastry wrapped around her fingers. We then see Pastry taking Licorice to his special place, a large kitchen where he makes his sweets. The scene then shifts to Huberek Castle, where a man asks Huberek about sending his daughter to Morteln village. We learn that Huberek already suspected that Ritesh is after Pastry, and it's due to this reason that he sent her there. He planned it so that Licorice will accompany Pastry to the ceremony, making it difficult for Ritesh to make any move on Pastry. Also, he wants his daughter to be safe as there is a threat that the neighboring territory might attack. We then see Pastry making samples for a gift that he plans to bring to the ceremony. Licorice notices the bonkas, and Pastry mentions that they're precious to him as he had spent all his allowance to get them. He then continues to prepare the dessert, and Licorice is mesmerized by its aroma. He then drops his sweet liquid onto the plate and calls it hard candy. As finishing touches, he gives them different shapes. Although Licorice recognizes some of the animal shapes, she fails to recognize a plane and thinks that it's a bird. She mentions that seeing how pretty they are, she doesn't want to eat them, but Pastry tells her she has to because that's what candy is for. Meanwhile, outside the kitchen, his mother and sister are eavesdropping on them, hoping to see some plot development. Lumi is trying to keep them quiet, while Mark wonders what he is doing here. Pastry then pours the candy syrup onto the bonka fruits, and Licorice thinks they're beautiful. He asks her to try it out, and she loves it. He then goes to the door and opens it, causing his mom and sister to fall. He confronts them about it, but they make up an excuse and run off, leaving Mark and Lumi behind. He mentions that he planned to give the dessert to them, but since they eavesdropped, he won't give it to them and plans to give them to his dad and Fuel instead. We then see Cass and Fuel discussing the tea tasting ceremony. Since it's mainly for young singles, they plan to assign Nicolo as Pastry's bodyguard. Cass is confident about his son and thinks he can handle himself. However, he's more worried about Ritesh making any moves on Licorice. The scene then shifts to the ceremony, where Pastry arrives with Licorice. They are all amazed by the decorations, and they think it's even better than the royal capital. Pastry mentions that it's one of the greatest castles in the south, also known as the Pirate Castle due to its proximity to the ocean. Pastry then notices that Ritesh has framed the photo he had gifted her, and thinks she has intentionally put it there. Just then, Ritesh's servant, Khoten Engels, arrives and welcomes them. He then introduces Pastry and his fiancée to the crowd. Pastry then gifts the crowd with his hard candy, and they try it out. Everyone loves it, and when Khoten tries it, he enjoys the sensation of Pastry's sweet liquid melting inside his mouth. Pastry then tells the crowd that there are more samples left, and he would love to send them for free through the merchants, but asks them not to subject those merchants to sugar taxes. It wouldn't be fair if merchants were charged every time he sent them gifts. Just then, Ritesh arrives hearing his proposal, and wants to learn more about it. She tells him that all business talks need to go through her, but Pastry clarifies that they were just discussing gifts. She suggests they discuss it in private, and Pastry goes with her, leaving Licorice in the care of Nicolo and Sarah. Afterward, we see them in a private room, and Pastry asks if she's worried that he will harm her because of the guards. But Ritesh tells him that if she were worried, she'd have 10 times more guards, considering he is a magic user. Pastry then takes out his hard thing, and asks her to put it in her mouth. "I meant the candy." She tastes his hard candy, and finds it delicious. He tells her that he plans to produce all the ingredients in his territory, which shocks her. He explains that he'll be able to mass-produce the candies in 3 years, and he wants her support. She thinks that Pastry is planning something big for the future, but she can't seem to figure it out. She agrees to assist him but only regarding the candies, and Pastry thanks her. Meanwhile, in the castle hall, Khoten mentions that Pastry has been the talk of the party and suggests that he will receive many offers to build his harem. This upsets Licorice, and Sarah and Nicolo try to comfort her, but she decides to leave and wants to go home. On the other side, Pastry is walking with Ritesh and is glad to have her support. Ritesh then asks him about Licorice and wonders if he loves her. He tries to avoid the question, but she wraps her arm around him, and holds him down with her giant assets. She tells him that she won't let go until he admits his true feelings. Just then, Licorice arrives and is shocked to see them in that position. This is where the video ends. Thanks for watching and see you in the next part.